Bing bong. I am back with another edition of the State of Bitcoin podcast, where I've got a very special guest, Graham, the director of the documentary Dare to Dream, all about the adoption and the whole entire story of how Bitcoin became legal tender in El Salvador. And we just had a big election. Javier Milei of Argentina just got elected. Maybe he's not Bukele, maybe he is. I don't know. But it's also encouraging to see a lot of adoption going on from there. So, Graham, I'll start it right off the bat. Obviously, we met in El Salvador at Adopting Bitcoin, the conference. So, what's your take on Javier Milei and the adoption going on in Argentina and globally?
Hey, Brandon. So yeah, great to be on. Thanks for having me on, and great to see you again. Just one small little thing. I've got to just correct you on the introduction. I'm not the director of the film. I'm the producer. So yeah, no worries, no worries. It's more out of respect to the actual director. So the director is Joe Delahunty. But yeah, so I was the producer. So yeah, the election in Argentina. Well, very interesting, right? I was a bit worried after the first round when it looked like he was way ahead in the polls and everything, and everyone was saying he was going to win, and then he kind of I think he just lost out in the first round, right, to the other guy, forget his name. And so it felt a bit like, oh, hang on a minute, is this gonna slip away? Is there some dodgy stuff going on in the elections over there? Are they rigging it? And I had I wasn't so confident. Anyway, he got it. So that was very cool. I was definitely rooting for him, and yeah, he's as we all know, he's a Bitcoiner. Well, he's at least that's what he talks the talk anyway, right? So yeah, I think it's going to be very interesting what happens with him. I don't think he will go. I mean, from what we've heard so far from him, he's not going to go down the same path as Bukele and making it legal tender. He's talking about dollarization of Argentina, right? So I think his route's going to be to just deregulate it, make it completely, voluntary, and let the free market do its thing, right? And which I think makes perfect sense as well. I think what Bukele did was the right thing to do for El Salvador. I think it was as much about a huge symbolic gesture as anything else, right? And I think he had the kind of first mover advantage as well. If you're gonna make a big bold move like make Bitcoin legal tender, then you get everything that goes with that. You attract all the people that go down there, like us, right? And you attract the Bitcoiner tourism. You attract the internal investment. And so it's one thing about, it's a big kind of message to the people that, we're promoting kind of a freedom-based money within our country, but it's also a huge kind of message to the rest of the world saying, this is Bitcoin country, right? And so I think, but I'm not sure the next country can have that same impact. I don't know if it's if you're gonna get that. So it probably makes more sense for Argentina to go the way that he's talking and just make it just completely legal and make it as easy as possible, less the least amount of pain points possible for anyone to own it, use it, transact in it. And if merchants want to accept it, great. And if they don't, no problem, So to me, I think it's very exciting to see what's going to happen there. And not just Bitcoin either. I think he's got some pretty interesting points of view on a lot of things. So yeah, let's see what happens. But I think it's also a sign of, a lot of things happening in the world. Is, we just had the Dutch election as well, right? Which I don't know if the guy is pro Bitcoin or not, but he's quite an anti-establishment kind of guy, and so that's another one that's worth keeping an eye on. And as I say, I think it's a sign of the times. A lot of people going through some kind of awakening, let's say, right? Of just tired of the old ways, the old political establishment, the old parties that have been in command, let's say, in control for so long. So yeah, we'll see what happens with Milei.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there is some differences that you highlighted, which I didn't really think about before, which I appreciate. Is that El Salvador was using the U.S. dollar as it stood, right? And Argentina is obviously using the Argentinian peso, which has been hyperinflated, and it's just been absolutely crazy. So I think it's a step in the right direction, right? Getting to the U.S. dollar, which is the global reserve currency as it stands, and then the next transition would probably be towards Bitcoin. But with the development of El Salvador, right? I mean, obviously we met there. You said you've been going to the Adopting Bitcoin conference for a few years now, and you filmed the whole documentary and all that, based on El Salvador. So obviously you've seen the development over this time period. So why don't you dive into that and just kind of talk about like the changes that you've noticed from El Salvador? I mean, everybody was kind of mentioning the roads in El Zonte was like the biggest thing that, I heard from a lot of people it was dirt roads, and now it's like all concrete. But yeah, why don't you dive into some of the positive changes that you've noticed from just, the adoption of Bitcoin?
Yeah, I mean, so I went to the first. I've been to. They've had three, right? And I've been to all three adopting Bitcoins. I first went to El Salvador in the middle of 2021. So just a couple of months after the announcement was made. It was before even the law had come into gone through Congress. So so I think I've been like 4 times now in the last 2.5 years. So yeah, I've been able to see some changes. I mean, sort of zooming out, I think the biggest overall kind of change is a change of feeling within the country, right? It's the feeling of real hope and optimism. Back in 2021, that was starting to come through for sure. There was definitely already some very positive changes happening, but it's really escalated in the last 2.5 years. And so when we were making the film towards the end of 2021, we spent a month in the country on the ground filming every day, and so visiting, going to different places. So we spoke to a lot of locals, drivers, people, in the pupuserias, in the local bars, whatever. And so we got to meet a lot of local people. Also, we had some people actually helping out in the crew that were from El Salvador, and there was still a sense of there was this kind of tragic sort of feeling that was still coming through, because we just heard so many stories about the violence of the gangs and the hopelessness that was. And now people were starting to think, starting to talk about, well, it looks like Bukele is going to be doing something different. We're definitely supporting him, but it was still apprehensive about what the future held for them, and now, or going just a few weeks ago and before that even, you really feel like they believe now. They really believe. They can see it with their own eyes, right? That the country is changing. He is delivering on his promises, and yeah, it's just it's a country in kind of on a real growth curve. The economy is getting better. And then, yeah, of course, on the, you know, on a kind of more micro level, the roads are getting better, and general infrastructure is improving. And, you know, I think a lot of the stuff actually is, you know, is happening outside of you know, El Zonte is obviously the kind of the mecca, if you like, for Bitcoin, as everybody goes there. So we can all talk about what's happening in El Zonte, and there's definitely a lot of change there. Not just roads, but a lot more bars and restaurants and hotels kind of building, and real estate development and so on. But outside of El Zonte, I haven't had a chance to travel that much in the last couple of times I've been, but just I follow a lot of El Salvador, you know, Salvadorian people on X, and obviously follow Bukele and some of the government people, and you can just see a lot of, you know, just what they're talking about and videos that they're making is it's just, you know, from building hospitals to building new library. They got this beautiful, amazing library that they've just built, right? And I love that. I love that they, you know, sometimes in some of these older parts of Europe, you know, you see the old libraries that were built, you know, 100, 200 years ago, and just the amount of, you know, the kind of glorious architecture that they use to build a library. In other words, they put so much importance on the kind of educational side of being able, their people having access to literature, to books, to educate themselves. And so I love that, seeing that in El Salvador they've done the same thing. They've like built this incredible library. So yeah, there's amazing changes. Really is a country that's just kind of defying all beliefs, you know, in terms of the transformation that's going on, and it's just amazing to see. It's such a joy to go down there, right? How did you find it? Because that was your first time, right, down there.
What's up, everybody? We're taking a quick commercial break here to bring you the sponsor, the Bitcoin Advisor. Are you wondering, how can I guarantee the security of my Bitcoin? How can I shield my Bitcoin assets from any unexpected loss? What happens to my Bitcoin assets after I'm gone? How can I educate my family about these investments? And lastly, can I invest these investments into my retirement fund, into Bitcoin? Well, I can help you with all of that. You can book an appointment with me, the one and only, you can't clone me, Brandon from Green Candle. If you go to the link below, thebitcoinadvisor.com/Green Candle, that's advisor with an E. I get tripped up on that. I'm not a great speller, but I can help you with all of those questions I mentioned earlier. All right. Now book an appointment, and I'll see you back at the episode. Yeah, it was my first time. It was great. I mean, you know, I tried to get away from, like, I guess I'll call it like the Bitcoin bubble in a sense, right? I mean, because adopting Bitcoin is I guess a lot of the gringos were down there, right? Having a good time partying
Exactly.
El Salvador, that kind of stuff. But, you know, I got connected with a great driver. So shout out to Jaime Garcia. He connected me with Jeremy, who is a native El Salvadorian. He lived in the States a little bit, so he spoke English, so it helped me out a little bit. But he connected me with like a local surf coach who, you know, he didn't take Bitcoin or anything. So, you know, it was good to kind of experience, I guess, that outside of it, to see, you know, just get a vibe of what the locals are really feeling about Bukele. Because obviously, you know, from the outsiders looking in, you know, you hear Max and Stacy and everything really just promoting Bukele, saying like, you know, the great rebranding is what they've called it. And,
Right.
you know, obviously they have, right? I mean, I had no interest probably going to El Salvador prior to this, because I just, you know, I never really heard about it. Like Latin America was always like, the narrative was it's very dangerous, you know, especially growing up in the States. It's like, it's not really a good place to go and visit and vacation unless you're like on a cruise ship or something, and very protected. At least that's, you know, maybe what the ideas my mom put in my head. Right. But I mean, I was walking around like at night, perfectly fine. You know,
Yeah.
I went to school in the the University of Memphis, which is, you know, in America, it's not one of the safer cities. And I'll tell you, I felt a lot safer in El Salvador than I did walking around the streets of
Right.
Memphis. That's for sure. So I think that, you know, in general, it's developed a lot. It does have a lot of, like, I guess, like, I will say American, um, I don't even know how to word it. Maybe like American, influence. That's the word I'm looking for. American influence. Like, I mean, there's still like the McDonald's, you know, when I walked out of the airport, there was just like Subway, Pizza Hut, like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I think, like, you know, from what I could tell, I didn't really feel like I was in like a third world country, to say the very least. And El Zante was really pretty. I mean, you know, of course, there's some things on the roads, like some of them were not, you know, perfect. But, you know, I had a great time. I really did like it. But it was interesting, too. The one thing I did notice, too, is I stayed in San Salvador the whole time. I went and did day trips to El Zante, was that because of the gang, you know, I guess the gang violence that they've had before, is that the whole city kind of shuts down around like 8:30, 9 o'clock. And there's really not much going on like outside of that, unless, you know, you have the Bitcoiners kind of going out and doing their own parties and things like that. So I did find
Right.
that to be interesting. But other than that,
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it, man. It was great. You know,
Yeah.
yeah. Does that sound
Yeah.
like a fair, I guess?
Yeah, yeah, no, exactly. I mean, it's true though what you said. I mean, it's an amazing, you know, it's an amazing country. The people, I love the, you know, the Salvadoran people. Everyone who goes there always talks about the people, Salvadorian people. They're such you know, friendly, generous, nice people. But it's very true what you said about the you know, early kind of everything shutting down at really early there. And I'd never thought about it. I guess it probably is a kind of a legacy of the gang, you know, culture that was there. Yeah, I guess that's where it comes from, because it's true. And it kind of goes back, and like everyone eats really early, the kitchens close early, the restaurant, you know, it's a strange one. But I guess that will change over time with you know, now it's a much safer, more secure place. But yeah, good. Glad you enjoyed it. It's quite an experience.
Yeah, so I mean, all right, yeah, I mean, it was great, and I think I'll definitely be going back sometime in the near future. I don't know if I'll be there for the halving party, or if, you know, maybe I'll go back for adopting or something like that again. But overall, you know, I mean, it's some place that I'm definitely going to plan on visiting, you know, at least maybe yearly, hopefully yearly. Yeah, I mean, I did enjoy surfing too, so I'm gonna have to try to get better at that so I can actually, you know, rip some waves and things like that when I go
Right.
down.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's talk about like adoption as a whole, right? I mean, we mentioned Argentina. You know, you mentioned, what was the other? Was it Netherlands? The other country
Yeah,
that they.
well, it was just a you know, one of these. I don't know about what's happening in terms of Bitcoin there, but or you know, I don't know the name of the guy, to be honest. I did know, but I can't remember. It's a Dutch name, I've forgotten. But it was just it was one of these another kind of, you know, a politician that got voted in there that's got a similar kind of thing going as say like Malay, just a little, you know, he's not part of the establishment, and kind of, because there's, you know, there's a lot of shit going on down in the Netherlands, right? The farmers there have been treated. I don't know if you know anything about all of that, but there's big problems with they're trying to effectively kind of shut down half of the farmers there. So well, they're making it impossible for them to live, so that they fall into line with these kind of green sustainability, climate change goals, and it's just, there's been a big uprising by the farmers there, because it just makes their lives completely impossible. And anyway, so that's just kind of one thing. But I think there's, you know, the people who are from the Netherlands will go a lot deeper into it than that. But so yeah, this guy that's been voted in is, you know, is another one that's kind of you know, anti-status quo, let's say. But in terms of Bitcoin adoption, I'm not really sure where he stands on that.
Yeah,
But,
well, I mean, you're coming from a European perspective, right? But you filmed a documentary in El Salvador. So I kind of want to talk about the differences that you see maybe from like a European adoption, maybe even it's just a mindset to like a Latin American, kind of adoption. Like, what are some of the differences you see? And, I guess what are some of the hurdles that you see in like both regions?
okay, so yeah, I mean, to be honest, I don't know if there's a huge amount of difference between European adoption and North American adoption, right? I think although I think North American adoption is Bitcoin is more prevalent in the adoption in the US than in Europe. In Europe, it's in a similar way. Bitcoin is seen very much as I guess, a sort of digital gold, right? It's a store of value. I think it's seen as something that can be, well, let me just kind of step back one moment. I talk about Bitcoin being as the kind of the biggest, probably the only global bottom up kind of movement, right? Grassroots movement for changing the world that we've ever seen. And to me, it is a movement more than a community, right? We talk about a Bitcoin community. I think there's a lot of differences between different, Bitcoiners. And so for me, it doesn't feel so much like a community per se, but it feels very much like a movement that we're all trying to move in the same direction, because we see it as really a game changer, that it could fundamentally, change the world for the better. And then within that movement, you have all these different types of adoption, right? So you have the store of value. I think very much in the developed world, in Europe and the US, it's seen more as a kind of store of value and a belief system around it, that if we rally enough people into this movement, that it'll, and we can get a Bitcoin standard of some sorts adopted in different parts of the world on a kind of big enough scale, then it will fundamentally change the world. And all the problems that we know about the fiat money system will have to change. The fiat money system is, corrupted in so many parts of our society, from, food production to health to, something that often gets talked about, the kind of the wars, the endless wars that we seem to be involved in, and how that can, massively constrain governments and to be funding these mostly what seems to be pointless wars, right? So I think that, that there's this in the US and Europe, there's this, kind of, store of value will lead to much greater purchasing power in the future if you hold Bitcoin. It's a very much a hodling mentality, right? So we store it, we own it, we get it into cold storage, into hardware wallets, and we really hope that this is going to change the world, and we believe it's going to change the world. So I think that's one kind of adoption. And then let's say at the kind of individual retail level, and then you've got the kind of Michael Saylors of this world, who are starting to lead that, which is another kind of adoption, right? Which is the kind of corporate adoption, which is really very much thinking of it as the best, hardest money that there is, and therefore an asset that you fundamentally have to have on your balance sheet, because it's going to, otherwise if you're holding cash, you're going to be losing value over time. It's the kind of anti-inflation mentality, right? Which is driving that kind of adoption. So there's another type of adoption, which is still, I would say, more in the developed world, the corporate side. And then obviously down in Latin America, I think you got another kind of adoption going on. Well, it's a mixture, right? You have got definitely people holding and saving because well, they have probably even greater inflation problems than we do. And so they do see it as a store of value. But there's much more of also a utility side, right? So actually thinking of it as a as a way to transact, a means of exchange. And so so that's what we saw in El Salvador, right? That was the beginning of it. In El Zonte, it all started with really the circular economy, right? Actually thinking about Bitcoin as a way to get people who don't have bank accounts, who have no access to banking, to be able to own Bitcoin, to actually have some form of digital money and a way of transacting in a digital way. And so I think that's what we're really seeing, the circular economies, Bitcoin being used like that in Latin America and obviously in Africa and some parts of Asia as well. So yeah, I think those are the kind of big differences that we're seeing at the moment. Really, as I say, the kind of more store of value, change the world mentality of kind of Europe and the US versus more solving, I would say, immediate needs in places like Latin America and Africa. Make sense?
Quick commercial break to bring you some of the dopest Bitcoin merch in the game. That's Hodler's Official. That's HODLERS official.com. You can go and get yourself a black jersey like I got on right here, or a white one where you can get the Genesis pack with the 09 on the block, repping Satoshi, repping the #1 guy in Bitcoin. And you can get yourself the best merch by going to hodlersofficial.com and using promo code GreenCandle for 10% off your entire order. That's 2 handfuls of percentages, ladies and gentlemen. 10% off. You can use the rest of that to purchase more Bitcoin or do whatever you want with it, but I'm saving you some Skrilla Manila. So go ahead and get yourself one. I prefer the black, but if you like the white, I don't mind that either. All right, now back to the show. Yeah, no, that makes sense 100%. And I agree with you too, because yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, the currencies in like Latin America or Africa, if they have their local currencies, they're way, more inflated. And they, don't have as close of a tie to the dollar as maybe like the euro does, and more of these stable economies, right? I mean, you're basically like, it's the third world versus the first world at a point, right? I mean, it might not be, I guess, the most PC thing to say it that way, but at the end of the day, they're developing countries. They're still figuring things out, right? I mean, whereas Europe, obviously very developed. The United States, obviously, the most developed country right now, I guess is what we can call it. It obviously has its fair share of problems, but it's been the global power for quite some time now, especially since we went onto the dollar standard and moved away from the gold standard. So it is interesting to kind of keep track of all of that and see how things are developing. But I guess in the stage, right? I mean, on Bitcoin Twitter, it's a very popular phrase to say, like, we're still early. I want to get your perspective on that, right? Because I mean, you've been on the ground, filming some of the early adoptions, right? I mean, you've been in El Salvador too, where you've seen the transition from the first time it was introduced as legal tender to now, where it's still a couple years down the road, but it's still like, it still needs some development. Some people still are not accepting Bitcoin in El Salvador. So, where do you see where we're at, I guess, on this scale of, the quote unquote, we're still early?
Well, yeah, I mean, we're very early, right? It's funny because I got into Bitcoin very early. Because I was already a gold bug. And so I'd already gone down the kind of rabbit hole of understanding our fiat monetary system and all the flaws of our fiat monetary system before Bitcoin even turned up. So I was very primed for Bitcoin when it first kind of came onto the scene, when I first heard about it back in kind of 2010, I think. And so, it's funny thinking about how early we are, because back then I thought I was kind of, that was early, but here we are nearly 14 years later, and it's still very, very early, right? And so it's very early in everywhere. It's it's amazing when you think about because I remember that a few years ago there were some people kind of making these claims that, you know, Bitcoin was, the adoption of Bitcoin, the rate of adoption was just incredible. It was faster than the rate of the internet, and they were using some really bogus kind of metrics to make those claims, right? And numbers of Bitcoin addresses and things like that. And the truth is, you know, the way I see adoption is, if you only own Bitcoin and you own it and you only own it and you're not looking to trade out of it, then you get Bitcoin, right? That's real adoption. If you own Bitcoin as a basket of other crypto, you know, other shit coins, then, and you're looking to just, you know, sell it at, you know, when it goes 5x or 10x or whatever, then that's not adoption, right? That's not Bitcoin adoption. You're just a trader. And so the people who actually are buying Bitcoin and own and holding it, and I'm not one of these people who thinks you should only hold and never spend, because I think these circular economies are really important. And so I actually do think some spending of some sats makes perfect sense to me. But you own it with and hold a certain amount with the view that this is the future, right? That you believe Bitcoin is the long-term future. That to me is real adoption. So when you think of it like that, then we're incredibly early, because there's just such a small amount of people, you know, that actually have that mentality and own Bitcoin in that way. I would, if I had to, you know, make a guess, I would say maybe 1% of the population, maybe less, own Bitcoin like that. Probably less, actually. You know, if you think about, if you were to walk down a busy high street, so you know, somewhere in the US, you know, in, I don't know, New York or Chicago or somewhere, or if you were to walk down a busy high street in London or in, you know, Paris or something, I bet it's less than 1 in 100 people actually own Bitcoin with that mentality. And so maybe it's one in 1,000 even, you know, I don't know. Probably somewhere between 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000. So that's, you know, when you think of it like that, then we're incredibly early. And so, yeah. And then thinking of it down in El Salvador, it's very similar. It's still very, very early. I think we all probably had too high expectations when Bitcoin was made legal tender there to begin with. I know that I did. I didn't think it was going to just, you know, like everybody was going to adopt it just like that. But I did think that it would probably have made bigger strides than it has, to be honest, up until now. There's still very low level of adoption in El Salvador. But that, you know, now I've just kind of recalibrated, and, you know, to me now it makes sense. It doesn't make me feel in any way negative about it or less optimistic about it. It's just like, yeah, these things are going to take time. And if you think how slow it's been to take off in much more technologically developed countries, you know, like the US or Europe, then of course El Salvador, which is really you know, is coming from a long way behind in that sense, is going to be much slower. So yeah, incredibly early. Which is, you know, makes it just even more bullish and optimistic for the future. And I think, you know, there's a phrase that I think it's Parker Lewis really kind of latched onto, or I don't know if he coined the phrase. No, he took it from something else, and I can't remember now, but the whole gradually then suddenly phrase, right? I think we are getting close to this then suddenly part, right? I think that's getting closer and closer. And the reason I say that is because I do believe there is a real awakening going on throughout the world. We kind of touched on it a little bit earlier with these elections and stuff, but I think people are waking up more and more to the idea that the world is being run in a fundamentally bad way, and I think people are, the inflation that people have had to deal with in the last couple of years, I think that's woken up a lot of people. But I think it goes beyond that. I think the way the whole COVID thing was handled woke up a lot of people in terms of just, there is a kind of, there has been this sense of them and us, right? Or us and them, the kind of this handful of kind of, well, not handful, but it's tiny microscopic elite of people who have been enriching themselves on this fiat system, this central banking fiat system that's been in place for so long, and at the expense of the rest of the population. And so I feel like that is really happening now on a big scale, that people are waking up to the way that just the malevolent way that the system has been set up and run for so long. And so I think part of that awakening will eventually lead to more Bitcoin adoption. It'll start with just like, oh, what's, maybe I should check out this Bitcoin thing. Maybe it's not so crazy after all. And step by step, that's going to lead to more and more adoption. So yeah, I think that the then suddenly bit is really not that far away. I think the next few years we're probably going to see a big change, a big growth in adoption. I think it's going to be much bigger than the previous, let's say, bull market. I think this next bull market we're going to see, I'm not saying mass adoption, I'm not going that far, I'm not saying we're going to have hyper Bitcoinization in the next few years, no. But I think if we're talking, like less than 1% adoption now, I could see that, getting to at least 5% in the next few years. So we'll see, but I feel it's coming.
Yeah, and I mean, I agree with you there. I honestly, maybe I'm a little more naive. I think we are above the 1%, at least having some sort of knowledge of Bitcoin, maybe not just being like full-fledged Bitcoiners where it's like, all right, they're maxis, they're out there sunning their balls and doing all that kind of stuff. But I do think that, the general population, at least like in the United States even, has heard of Bitcoin. Whether they've done the self, I think that's the start, right? Where it's like, kind of like you said, it's the gradually then suddenly. It just takes all those touch points, right? I think like there's something like it says like 5 to 7, or maybe it's like 6 touch points or something before somebody actually gets it or really takes, some sort of dive into it. So I think, the more that Bitcoin's getting in the mainstream news, especially like if we have this bull run coming up next year or maybe the year after, who knows about the timing of it, but when that kind of comes, that's when, like, we'll start to see the then suddenly, maybe, I don't know. I'm not a firm believer in the super cycle, so to speak, but I think like with every bull run, more and more people come on, and then with every drawback, it weeds out some people, but some will come back on as well. But let's dive into your documentary. We haven't gotten into it yet, The Dare to Dream, right? Great film, and a great project that you worked on. You came in and you've been able to promote it at some of these conferences, speak a little bit about that. Why don't you just give a broad overview of what the documentary was, kind of what it covered, and everything like that, for the audience who may have not seen it just yet.
Okay, I just want to quickly just like address something you just said, though. I definitely agree with you that the in terms of knowledge and awareness of Bitcoin, yeah, we're probably at, more like 80%, in terms of people actually knowing about it and kind of more or less having some idea of, that it's this, digital form of money. So yeah, that I totally agree with you. But what I was, the point I guess I was trying to make is that in terms of the low level of adoption, when I think of adoption as just people who own it and they don't own other crypto, and they own it for the right reasons, right? Because they understand it. But anyway, so just wanted to make sure we're kind of on the same wavelength. But yeah, so the documentary. So the basically it was a project that came about by chance, really. I mean, not completely by chance. I went down to El Salvador. I'm not. So I guess the important point to make is that I'm not actually a filmmaker by background, right? I'm a Bitcoiner. I had a career in other areas before I became I reinvented myself as a film producer. Yeah, I went down to El Salvador back in 2021 because I was just blown away by the story. I'd gone down the rabbit hole and learned about Bitcoin Beach in El Zonte, and I just thought it was such a crazy story. I had to go down and check it out, and I've always had that kind of sense of, I guess, adventure, right? The spirit of adventure. It's like, right, this sounds like a fun trip to go on. So I went down there and met the guys behind Bitcoin Beach, and I was just blown away by the once I'd learned more about the story and their backstory and everything that they'd been doing even before the whole Bitcoin, the Bitcoin part, right? So they'd been working on these projects, these kind of community projects, to try and change their community. They had these big ideas, that dreams, which is part of the why that it's called Dare to Dream, to change their country, because their country was in such a terrible situation, right? Their project started before Bukele turned up, and when they were kind of growing up, when they were becoming young adults, everybody else, all their peers, were fleeing El Salvador and making that trip to go to the US. Well, they were either doing that or they were getting sucked into the gang culture, right? And so it was just a real country of hopelessness and despair. And so these guys, they decided to try and stop the rot, let's say. And they had this whole idea that somebody had to stay and try and change things, otherwise their country was never going to change. And so that's how it began. And then they met Mike Peterson, who became a mentor and really then helped them and empowered them to work on these community projects. And then Bitcoin came along through this anonymous Bitcoin donor, and they, to cut a long story short, they ended up creating this circular economy, which was really the idea of the donor, right? This anonymous Bitcoin donor wanted to see how Bitcoin could be used as a medium of exchange, and so that's how it came about, and they made that. And so it was just this crazy story. And then the fact that it eventually led to, or inspired the government to make make it as a law for about legal tender. It just an amazing story. So I was blown away by it, and just felt, right, I gotta, this deserves to be made into a film, into a documentary. And I love documentaries, and I thought, well, maybe I could do it. So it was just one of those kind of impulsive decisions. Got chatting with Chimbera, one of the main characters, right? And he was like, yeah, let's do it. So before we knew it, we were talking about it one day. By the next day, we pretty much made an agreement that we were gonna, have a go and do it. So, yeah, that was the genesis of how it came about. And I brought in a guy that I'd worked with in the past on a very small project. It had nothing to do with documentaries. But I knew he was a good film director, this guy called Joe. And So brought him in onto the project, and yeah, I funded it and produced it. It was kind of, I guess, my vision, if you like, of what this film could be, what we were trying to achieve with it, and it became this huge project. I didn't really know what I was letting myself in for when I did it. I just, as I say, it was quite a spontaneous decision. And but it turned into like a 2-year journey, and the film just got released a couple of months ago. So yeah, it was turned into a huge project. But it went from being this, spur of the moment kind of idea to, I think it's now the most widely distributed Bitcoin documentary out there. And yeah, so it's turned into a big thing. So that's I guess the overview of it. We can dig deeper into any part of that.
The energy in this podcast is brought to you by Sovereign, the #1 energy drink in the game. You can use promo code GreenCandle at sovereignenergy.com. That's SVRN.com. And you can get 10% off your entire order whenever you put in promo code GreenCandle. And on the side, they've got a pull tab. You can pull off this tab for every single one. Scan it. They got a QR code in each can, and you get sats back too. So, woo! Now go get yourself some. Sovereignenergy.com, promo code GreenCandle. All right, back to the show. Yeah, I mean, that's great. I think everybody should check that out. But one thing that I'm curious about is not only just about the film, but about you, man. How has things changed for you since you've made that? I mean, obviously, it's a great accomplishment, most widely distributed Bitcoin film, which, has probably taken you to a lot of different places and like changed your life as obviously Bitcoin changes everybody's life, but really putting in that proof of work. I'm always curious to hear as to how it really changes the entrepreneur's life as well. So how does it change yours?
Well, I guess it hasn't like changed my life in the sense that because let me just go back a step. It was always a non-profit project, right? So I never wanted to I never did it to make money out of it. I did it to get the story out there because I thought that this was a story that needed to be told and to the wider world. And I guess just touching on kind of what I was saying earlier, I felt that this was a real opportunity to orange pill people, well, at least to really connect with a much bigger mainstream audience on a human level. Here, I thought there was these amazing characters and this amazing story and stories within the bigger story that I felt was a real, as I say, a real opportunity to connect with a more mainstream audience, not just Bitcoiners. And so I felt that if we could connect people and let's say dispel some of the misperceptions of what Bitcoin is, then maybe we could pique the interest of more people, and they would go down their own rabbit hole journey, so to speak, and get orange pilled, And so that was really the objective for me, was to try and really get out of the Bitcoin echo chamber and try and get this in front of as many different people from different walks of life as possible, in the hope that they would go, wow, I'd never realized that Bitcoin was like that, or that some of the people behind bringing Bitcoin to the world are so compassionate, and so so they seem such great people, and so that was so as I say, it was a non-profit venture. I actually made an agreement that 90% of any profits, if there would be any profits, would go to the Bitcoin Beach group and to their community projects. As it turns out, it's highly unlikely there will be any profits. So, but I wanted it to be very clear that it was a in hindsight, I probably should have just said 100% of profits, because I don't think it's going to make any profit. But but anyway, so the point being is that it wasn't a kind of career change, let's say. And so, as in, right now I'm doing all these different things because that's where my career has gone, and I'm making money, and it hasn't changed my life in that way, but it has changed my life in the sense that I guess I've now got a bit of the bug, and I actually want to do other films, and so still focusing on Bitcoin, but probably I'm starting to plan and think about now the next projects. I'm not sure yet, but I'm leaning towards Africa, and so that really will have a big impact in terms, if I end up doing this, then probably traveling around a lot of the African continent, and doing a lot of filming and stuff. That I'm meeting, as I say, meeting a whole bunch of new people, discovering new stories, new projects, and that's for me super exciting. So yeah, I've learned a lot about filmmaking in the last couple of years, and so that's changed. I never knew anything, and yeah, and it probably will have much bigger changes in my life in the coming years if I keep going down this path.
That's awesome, man. So yeah, have you made any plans? Obviously, you hinted a little bit about another film in Africa. Have you made any concrete plans just yet, or is it all just in the development stages right now?
It's definitely in development stages. It's not even. It's like the very beginnings of, because I'm still, to be honest, at the moment, really wanting to focus on getting the current film watched, right? And that's that's one of the big things, the big challenges as an independent filmmaker is one thing, getting the film made, and then there's another huge hurdle, which is actually getting it actually seen by people, right? Because without a big marketing budget or whatever, and connections in the industry, I mean, distribution is one thing. It's definitely, it's out on so many different platforms, and cable TV networks and satellite TV networks, and so in that sense, definitely overcame a big hurdle, and it's available and accessible in so many different ways. So that's great, but then you've actually got to get people to know about it and to go there and to watch it, and so I'm spending a lot of time on that at the moment. But yeah, aside from that, I'm starting to think about the next projects, and I'm it's tempting to do something else in El Salvador, because I've really made a strong connection there. I love what's happening there. I think it's super exciting, and there's going to be more great stories coming out of there. But on the other hand, I'm also seeing some really fascinating things happening in Africa, and that's actually where the biggest, they are leading the adoption in the world. I think Nigeria is the leader overall. It's the number one country in terms of Bitcoin adoption. But there are other countries, and there are all these different circular economies now that are taking inspiration from Bitcoin Beach, and they're sprouting up everywhere, all over Africa, and other places too. So, and there's some really fascinating mining projects happening in Africa, where they're bringing electricity to villages that didn't have electricity before, and so there's a lot of really cool stuff. And I've only just just dipping my toes in at this point, right, into what's going on there. So yeah, I'm tempted to kind of go in that direction, but we'll see what happens. I haven't made any decisions yet. And the thing is that the other thing for me, which is important, is I don't want to just make a documentary for the sake of making a documentary. For me, what was amazing about the Dare to Dream documentary was that it really was an incredible story, and so I want to find something. I want to find similar, incredible stories that, and again, at a real human level that really, connect with people on that kind of human emotional level. And so, yeah, we'll see what happens. But there are, there are things beginning to brew, I guess. That's where we're at.
That's great stuff. And yeah, man, I'm looking forward to it. So you're going to have to let me know when the next one's coming out. And yeah, well, thank you so much for your time, for coming on the pod. I know this has been a couple weeks since adopting Bitcoin. So thank you for working with me and getting some FaceTime with me again. And yeah, man, why don't you tell everybody where they can find Dare to Dream and follow along with, more of your projects going along in the future?
Well, thank you, first of all, for having me on. Really appreciated it. Great catching up. Really enjoyed hanging out with you in El Salvador. So it's super cool to come on your pod. So people can follow me on X. My profile is Bitcoin_films, and where you can find out how to watch the Dare to Dream documentary is best to go to the website, which is daretodream-film.com. Go to the news section and you'll see where it's where it's listed out all the different platforms in different parts of the world. It's worth noting that's the thing. I can't just say go to YouTube and find it. It does depend where you are. That's the it's a slightly frustrating challenge of having it so widely distributed, is that it's in different places depending on the region. But yeah, go to the website and it's all there. In the US, it's very, very easy to find. You can just if you just Google it, you'll get a whole list of different places. It's on all the cable TV networks there. It's on the biggest satellite TV networks. It's on Apple TV, Amazon, Google Play, YouTube Movies, and then through our website outside of the US and Canada, you can also buy it with Bitcoin. I should just mention that it is a people do have to pay to see it. That's the distributor's decision. We'll see whether it ends up one day. Maybe there's a chance it will still end up as part of a subscription package like Netflix or something. But for the moment, it's a transaction thing. But yeah, if you've got a Apple account or an Amazon account, it's a few bucks. It's nothing. So I encourage people to check it out. And yeah, thank you. Thanks again for having me, and I hope people enjoy it. And I would love to come back on again as and when time is right.
Yeah, for sure. We'll definitely have you back on, especially when it comes around the next project. So yeah, everybody go support Graham, support the great documentary. It's amazing. Gives you the green candle stamp of approval. Everybody should go check it out and support the plebs, man. Support the projects they're putting out there. And yeah, Graham, thanks so much for your time, man.
Thank you, man. Thanks a lot, Brandon. Good to be on.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this great episode. If you enjoyed this one and you want some more content, click on the link right here and check out my latest interview with Tom Luongo. We get into it all. If you've known Tom, he's a wild one, so stay tuned. And if you found some value in this podcast, please smash that like button, hit that subscribe button so you get notified of the next videos. All right, I'll catch you at the next one.